What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with Brendon Kleen from Locked On Suns. As Suns owner Robert Sarver has been suspended for 1 season and fined $10 million after creating and fostering an environment of racism, sexism, and general harassment within his organization. What potential fallback will this have on the Phoenix Suns? Will Robert Sarver be forced to sell the team further down the line? We're going to get there in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at RocketMoney. Do you know how much subscriptions really cost? Most Americans think they spend around, $80 or so a month on subscription services when the actual total is closer to $200 or more. That's right. You could be wasting hundreds of dollars each and every month on subscriptions that you don't even know about sometimes. RocketMoney is the app that I love using that takes care of that problem for me. It's formerly known as Truebill. The app shows you all your subscriptions in one place and cancels what you don't want or need anymore. RocketMoney can even find subscriptions that you didn't know that you were paying for. You may even find out you've been double charged for certain subscriptions. To cancel a subscription, all you have to do is press cancel. You click the button and RocketMoney takes care of the rest. You can cancel unnecessary subscriptions with RocketMoney starting today. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Seriously, it could save you hundreds of dollars per year. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Joining us now is Brendon Kleen from Locked On Suns. You can follow on Twitter at BrendonKleen14. Now, Brendon, after reported allegations against Phoenix Suns and Phoenix Mercury owner Robert Sarver last year of creating and fostering an environment of racism, sexism, and general harassment within his organizations, Sarver has now been suspended for 1 season and fined $10 million after what was almost a year-long investigation conducted to figure out just exactly what was going on in Phoenix. Let's start with just on the surface, before we get into some of the specifics of the details of this, of the probe and trying to figure out, everything that was going on here, was the suspension and fine enough, or should the NBA have strived to do more?
It's a difficult question. I think on the side of the fine, unfortunately, that's the max that he could have been fined. And so people feeling like that's, small potatoes, I think they're right. I think the NBA got a little bit screwed over as far as not foreseeing more problems. And maybe you could criticize them for wanting to do more. But in terms of the full punishment, I don't think it goes far enough. I think you could have easily seen a longer suspension. I feel like there's a way to read the punishment that's sort of, in the NBA's most ideal circumstances, this is now giving Robert Sarver time to sell the team, which we can discuss if he will give in on that. And if you had punished him by suspending him longer, I think you would have only increased the likelihood that he would have gone ahead and sold the team, just not thinking all of this was worth it for him anymore. None of that is really the case now. So you have now left with a fine that's not all that extensive, a suspension that's only 1 year, and of course, most likely is he's still the owner of the team, at least for the short term.
And there were various, former employees. I mean, in total, more than 320 current and former employees, as well as Sarver himself, interviewed, questioned about, going through this entire investigation. Many of whom, at least in the aftermath, anonymously, upset at the ruling, the way that the NBA has decided to handle this situation. We'll get into some of the players who have even commented on the outcome of this situation, but some of the details and specifics here, because it is not great stuff, but apparently at least on 5 separate occasions, Sarver had repeated the N-word when recounting statements of others, engaged in instances of inequitable conduct, I should say, toward female employees, and engaged in demeaning and harsh treatment of other employees, including name yelling, cursing at them, just generally harboring a not a great work environment, if we're putting it, and that's putting it incredibly lightly here. This is, a very, a situation that for many would be deemed untenable. And that's basically what it became for a lot of, current and former employees. You mentioned it there a moment ago. Could this be the beginnings of Robert Sarver being forced out, right? Forced to sell the Suns and the Mercury?
Forced? Probably no. I mean, right? Like, I think the NBA's decision here was the only real thing that was going to legally, officially force Sarver to sell the team, right? It would have been a vote by the other owners. It would have been a whole to do. That ship seems to have sailed. I think you have seen some dominoes falling that maybe could lead us to him somewhat voluntarily. Again, I do want to remind people that when we think of that as some sort of punishment, it's a heck of a punishment to get hundreds of $1,000,000 for acting like a turd for 20 years, right? So in that case, even if it's not forced and it is kind of like, his hair is pulled and he's dragged around and then he eventually gives in, that's still pretty good for him. And that could happen. We've seen PayPal, who's the jersey patch sponsor for the Suns, say that they will not redeem or re-up that contract with the Suns at the end of this season when it expires if Sarver is still the owner. We've seen people like Chris Paul, LeBron James, and the executive director of the NBPA all say that the punishments didn't go far enough. The NBPA director went so far as to say that she was calling for the resignation. We also saw calling for the removal is what she said. Again, I think that ship has sailed, but we get the gist of what she's saying. And then the second largest shareholder of the Suns, who holds the title of vice chairman, he's a guy who's done a lot of social justice work with Colin Kaepernick. He's very involved in sports. He's in F1, etc. He has also called for the resignation of Robert Sarver. So if those dominoes continue to hit other dominoes, you could see the public pressure just get so bad that the bottom line is being affected. The community conduct and relationships go hurt so badly that he just eventually gives in and chooses to sell the team. But it feels like we're still quite a ways away from that.
It's crazy to think to me, right? And I think this is one of the, at least maybe common misconceptions among, certain NBA fans possibly, is that some people I think that, Adam Silver just has like omnipotency over the NBA. He can just, pick and choose, fire people, remove owners. He doesn't have that kind of power. In fact, actually the owners of the NBA teams are his boss, right? Like he works for the owners, and that's part of the intricate balance of how this situation has to be addressed and handled. And in a way, the amount of blowback that the NBA has seemingly received in light of their decision on how to rule based on their internal findings and everything of the investigation, information that wasn't made, readily available to the public, outside of just the actual report that made its way out there. As far as all that's concerned, that might actually be the blowback might actually be enough, right? The outside pressure might be what is enough to actually get Sarver to potentially step away or sell the team, rather than, the NBA trying to step in and say, all right, well, now you have to sell it, right? Which is kind of an interesting way that things, how they kind of potentially work out, right?
It's a tricky situation, and I think the NBA deserves a lot of criticism for putting itself in that situation, because again, we're now in this situation where, I'm not saying that fans directly bore the brunt of how Sarver handled himself as owner, right? There were people in those meetings and workplace activities that clearly, as this report shows, were really dealing with it. But putting the pressure on, or putting the onus on, the workers or the corporate partners, the everyday people who are kind of business involved with the Suns, fans, players who are also employees, even though obviously we don't have to kid ourselves, they're also very wealthy people. But like, to put the onus on all of those people to kind of initiate change here is incredibly frustrating. And I think the NBA very much will be kind of saved from itself if that's how this ends up going. They could have acted more severely. They chose not to. And now the change that they could have implemented might happen anyway because of these other forces that are spurring that along. So that's a little bit frustrating. But yes, to your point, you even look to a situation like Donald Sterling. He was given a lifetime ban, but that didn't mean he was removed from his ownership. He lost control of the Clippers because his wife ended up determining and getting a judge to sign off on the fact that Sterling was no longer capable psychologically of managing the business. And so she was able to sell it on his behalf. Now, he obviously got the money, but that was how that played out. So yeah, there's not a lot of precedent for the commissioner coming out and saying, you're banned, your team's gone, goodbye, no dollars in your pocket, it's over. That wasn't probably ever going to happen, but the NBA fell way short of that.
Lastly here, and this is maybe at the end of the day, as far as just as it relates to the, on the court product for the Suns, how do you expect this situation to impact the day-to-day operations of the organization, and if there's any potential, blowback, fallout from the outcome here?
So they've been operating like a team who knew something was going to happen for a little while. Now, I don't even know if they knew the severity or the specifics of what the punishment might look like, but I do think there was an interview with the new assistant general manager who was, boundary breaking in her own right, having, the first black woman assistant general manager in the history of the NBA, very high profile hire from the league office. As an example, she gave an interview where she said during all of that hiring process, she never met Robert Sarver, right? So they've been moving forward with James Jones, I think, being kind of the main decision maker here. They have appointed an interim governor of the team to make some of those, real decisions, be at the league meetings, the owners' meetings, etc. On the floor, I feel like the basketball culture is not really related to Robert Sarver. I think James Jones and Monty Williams and Chris Paul and Devin Booker, mostly those four, have created a culture over the past 2 years and achieving really, really tremendous success that can withstand this. I think they probably already knew what Sarver was like. I don't think this is a shock to them. The report has been out there for a year, almost all of last season. They knew all of these allegations were out there. So I think they will be able to move forward. I don't think this will be the thing that makes or breaks their season. But obviously, as a whole organization, it is going to be a big adjustment period, and it's not going to go anywhere because, as we've said, there's still these looming questions about if he eventually sells, what are these corporate partners going to do, et cetera. And the Suns and the workplace culture and the leadership, that story is not going away anytime soon, I think. And if nothing else, it'll be right back in our faces next September when he would be allowed back.
What other dominoes can we expect to fall from the Robert Sarver suspension situation, all of that? Will it have any, on-court ramifications for the Phoenix Suns? Of course, you'll have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Suns. Brendon, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Anytime.